I've recently gotten a few comments suggesting that C4 Iansan is absolutely necessary in order to even use her with someone like Clorinde, and well, I have some thoughts because I now actually have C4 Iansan activated because I actually have C6 Iansan activated as well. So let's have a look at it. We're here with Iansan and the Abyss Tree. So what is C4 Iansan? What does it actually do? Well, TLDR, you can have a read through the actual constellation itself, but essentially, when you use Iansan's burst, you gain this surging force stack so long as someone else uses their burst after Iansan as well, and then whenever you restore Nightsoul points on the scale of Iansan's burst, you get to use one of your surging force stacks to restore 4 additional Nightsoul points, so you get to do that up to twice. On top of that, if you accidentally or manage to get more than enough Nightsoul points and it overflows, then Iansan will actually gain more Nightsoul points based on 50% of the overflow. So all of that kind of works together to basically give you a much easier time keeping up Iansan's buff. But on top of that, there is another secondary effect for this particular constellation, and that is if you were to play a team like this, the Clorinde Aggravate Hypercarry team that I have been using in a variety of my Iansan videos with Clorinde, just as demonstration purposes, we do kind of need to change our rotation a little bit. So now we're going Nahida, Iansan, Shillanen into Clorinde, as opposed to Nahida, Shillanen, Iansan, Clorinde. But as you can see, it was very easy to keep Iansan's buff scale above the 42 mark, thanks not just to the initial surging force, but also the overflow Nightsoul restoration. So that was actually pretty good for Clorinde. And so it seems to me that a lot of people are wondering if this is so good that it's absolutely necessary for Clorinde. To me, there is 2 reasons why I don't think it's absolutely necessary for someone like Clorinde. The first reason is actually the damage calculations. So here's the thing. I've gone ahead and I've had a look at how much damage I can actually do with Clorinde in terms of like hardest hitting hit, of course, with C6 Iansan, and then comparing that to the C6 Sara damage calculation, again, hardest hit shenanigans that I saw previously. And as far as I can tell, C6 Iansan is still outperformed by C6 Sara. Now, the margin is nowhere near as large as it used to be when I only had C0 Iansan or hell, C2 Iansan. So as long as I'm playing Sara correctly in, let's say, the Aggravate Hypercarry team, it seems to be that C6 Sara is still better than C6 Iansan. But the margin is not massive. In that regard, if you're trying to play, let's say, Clorinde Aggravate Hypercarry, C6 Sara, especially with a TF Clorinde, in my opinion, is still better, in which in that case, it doesn't really matter what constellation your Iansan is, I would probably recommend Sara over Iansan. So that's one way of looking at it. But the other way of looking at it, which I think is probably the more important way of looking at it, is that you really don't need Iansan's C4 to still be able to maintain Iansan's meter going up and sort of staying there. Because if you recall back to my video about Iansan and Clorinde, it does seem like with a bit more dashing, you can still maintain that buff meter. Now granted, if you are trying to hard stick to N3Es and only N3Es, then yeah, you're kind of in a bit of a pickle. And so what I have noticed is that if you were to play the old rotation, where we go from Iansan immediately into Clorinde, well, we do end up with something like this.
Bring it. Quick as a flash. Let into the shadows.
So definitely with C4 Iansan, as you can see, I'm not really getting the overflow healing or the overflow Nightsoul buff or Nightsoul restoration, and yet I am still able to rather easily maintain Iansan's buff above that 42 mark. And so with that in mind, seems to me that even with C4 Iansan, I don't actually have to play to C4 Iansan, so long as I am still, well, more importantly, not getting hit and therefore not being interrupted, everything seems a-okay. So it seems to me that having interruption resistance is actually more important than having that additional Nightsoul restoration. So with 2 avenues of discussing whether or not you really need C4 Iansan. First, you might not even necessarily need a Iansan if you're trying to maximize the damage of your Clorinde, because it seems like C6 Sara is still doing that for the most part. But then on the other hand, I'm still having a relatively easy time so long as I go from Iansan immediately into Clorinde to be able to maintain that buff meter anyway. So with that in mind, do you absolutely need C4 Iansan in order to be able to play Iansan with Clorinde? To me, the answer is probably going to be no. So we've talked extensively about the Clorinde Aggravate Hypercarry team. I just wanted to quickly go through some other team variants that you can run with Clorinde and Iansan, and mainly just look at which characters you would use their ults after Iansan in order to, of course, allow C4 Iansan to actually work. So with like a Clorinde Quickbloom team with Iansan, that one can be very interesting. It really depends on who's being hit the most between, let's say, Nahida or Yelan, because you could start off with Nahida into Iansan into Yelan's ult, and that would trigger C4 Iansan, or you could do the other way around. Start with Yelan into Iansan into Nahida's ult in order to trigger C4 Iansan. So either works in this particular regard before you start popping off with someone like Clorinde. In an Overwave team, if it's Malwika in the Overwave team, well, that seems to be the easy gimmick right there. If it's not Malwika and you're, let's say, running the higher instead, then I think someone like Yelan's ult could be the way that you trigger C4 Iansan before you start popping off with Clorinde. So that could be a bit of an interesting one right there as well. And then finally, when it comes to Overload teams, especially if you're running with Malwika, then once again, Malwika is the easy gimme. The rotation, I think, at the start, preferably if you have Chevrus's ult ready to go, you can start off with Chevy's ult into Iansan, into Chevy's skill, into Malwika, into Clorinde. It is a bit of a sort of weaving of the characters around, but that does seem to make the most sense, at least in my opinion. And then second rotation onwards, you can just go Chevy into Iansan, into Malwika, and just go from there. So at least that is really good. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments below. Obviously, having C4 Iansan does make things a lot easier. So if you're definitely a bit more on that struggle streak mentality, then perhaps C4 Iansan will make things easy enough where you will feel like it's much more necessary. But at least from my perspective, it doesn't seem to be the case. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoy. If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe for more. Hit your back to the next time. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Time to testify. Quietly now. Busted. Here comes the catch. Faster. Stronger. Let's move. Pyroclastic surge. Try and stop me. Ready. Quietly now. Game's up. Time's up. Quick as a flash. Start the clock. Light of the blazing sun. Full throttle. Moving. Where evil lurks. Shoot on sight. Gotcha. Busted. Here comes the catch. Faster. Stronger. Let's ride. Pyroclastic surge. Try and stop me. Into the shadows.